Okay, hello everyone. I had unexpected success with the first little example that I posted, getting way more views than I ever dreamed I would get. And people seem to want a second example, so I thought I would give it a go. Um, so this is what I'm doing now. Um, I'm taking a little bit different approach this time. I've actually preloaded the scene with the items that I want to show, and I'm going to talk about the steps I took to add them and move them and what have you into place. And the reason I did that was mostly in the interest of saving time, and so that I wouldn't have to show myself groping through my library and fumbling with the motion keys, because they're not really that important to this particular tutorial. But I am going to show you the essential steps and the essential settings. I'm still using the same slightly cheesy software that I used before to do the recording, and that means that you won't be able to see the cursor moving, but hopefully with the highlights that I'm going to put in different places, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm clicking, and I'm going to talk through all the important settings anyway. So hope you like it, and feel free to leave feedback in whichever way you feel you need to leave feedback. So this particular scene, once again, I wanted to do something fairly simple that was going to illustrate some concepts that are useful in lots of different kinds of renders. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time posing and doing other kinds of stuff like that, because that's not really the point of this particular one. So I have a lot of different things that I did in a preset sort of fashion. I like the assorted products that have look at my hair fur, and in particular the Arctic fox is one of my favorites. I've done a couple of renders with that one, and I thought maybe showing a little bit about how you can work with that fur might be useful as well. So I thought I'd just make a quick little scene with that fox. And so the first thing I did was I found the fox in my library, and I did so just by looking for Arctic fox, and I got this little setup, and then I clicked in the figures tab and I picked the Arctic fox with the look at my hair presets, and you can tell that's the furry one and that's the not so furry one. So I added him to the scene and I got this picture. And actually I got not quite that picture. When you add that one, you also get these two things. So that shows the look at my hair groups and the guide hairs, and where the hair is going to be. And those ones come stock with this particular figure. One of the great things about this particular product is that there are presets for look at my hair for a variety of animals, including ones that don't normally come with that fur on them. So you can just get those for nothing just by looking them up and apply them to your guys, and you can get a real sense of what's going on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing you the various different things you can do to groom the hair and pose the hair and lengthen the hair and shorten the hair or whatever else. That would be a whole tutorial unto itself. But working with the hair in iRay is interesting, and so I thought I'd show a little bit about that. So you can see right here, there's these two sphere groups that I have disabled. In fact, almost everything's disabled. I'll explain why these are what they are and what they mean later. That'll be one of the last things we do. Okay, so I have my fox and I have my look at my hair, and I wanted to pick a decent angle, so I played with my perspective view until I got it looking about like that, which maybe you could have seen in the other view. And then I went to the create menu and made a new camera, and I made that camera 1, be exactly what I was looking at through the perspective view, which you can do with just a little option in that dialog. So presto magico, I have like a bona fide camera. And one of the first things that I do when I start working with a camera is I'll usually turn the headlamp off pretty early on in my workflow. It's up to you to decide when to turn that headlamp off, because it's useful to have it there for a while, so you can see what you're doing without having to add a lot of lights to the scene. But generally that goes off fairly early on. As soon as I have any sort of meaningful lights going on, I'll turn that off, because that headlamp is going to just create a whole pile of light that is fairly difficult to control. Okay, the next thing that I did was I looked for my snowscape. And so I have a snowscape set, and I wanted to just have some simple environment that I could use for this. So I'm just going to turn all those things on so you can see what that looks like. It comes with a bunch of different little settings. It's a nice little guy. I think you can find that on DAZ 3D if you want. and it's a full environment. So another thing that I had to do was go to my render settings, and in environment I wanted to not have any lighting other than what was going to be in my scene. So um, typically I have dome lighting or sometimes sun and sky lighting. You can see the various options under here by looking there, but for me today I have just scene only, and so that means I'm going to have to do all the light myself. And that sky that you see back here, okay, that sky is like a million miles away from us. And so if I put, say, a spotlight in front of the fox, trying to light the sky with that spotlight is kind of like trying to take a flash photograph of the Grand Canyon. You need a mighty big flash to light the entire Grand Canyon. Likewise, you would need a ridiculous amount of light in order to light up that guy. So I don't use that technique at all. Rather, I went to my content library and pulled out my Uber base shader and applied it to that surface. Here's skies, and it had this base color for the sky, and I took that same base color, noting where the texture was, and applied it right here in the emission color. And let me go back there. And you can see where it is. That's sunset 1. So I applied it there, which you can do easily just by clicking this drop down, which is what it looked like before. Okay, and then I made it, so now I have an emission color, and I made the luminance about 5,000 right there. And 5,000 is comparatively low, but I want the sky to sort of light itself, but not really cast a whole lot of light on the scene. In this particular case, I'm trying to get sort of a twilight kind of look. So I wanted to light the fox separately with just light for the fox and keep the rest of the world somewhat in darkness. And so let me show you what it looks like with just that much. Okay, everything else is off now. In fact, I'm even gonna, I have at this very moment, I have the spotlight on that's letting me see the scene a little bit more easily. I'm gonna turn that off too. And we're just gonna switch to the iRay preview. And I'm sure that this actually works now. So last time this wasn't working at all. So you can see my little progress bar down there. It'll take a little while. Not too long though, and we'll get a sense of what we're going to get with just that light. Okay, so you can see the sky is lit. I can see it. You can see that, you know, the sky is lighting the haze in the back there and the hills a little bit. And, you know, since it's, there's a 360 thing going on, I'm getting a little bit of ground lighting as well, but not really very much. The fox is still comparatively dark, and I didn't want the fox to be that dark. So I'll have to do a little bit more work. So I'm going to turn off the iRay preview, switch back to texture shaded. So the next thing I did was actually I wanted to position a couple of planes for lighting, which I like to do. So I turned this off again because the planes are harder to see when there's a bunch of floor. So I'm going to switch to the top view here. Okay, so I added these two planes. In fact, first I added that one, and then I changed its surface. So let me pick it with the surface tool. I changed its surface and made its luminance about 500,000. And I actually, before I could even do that, I had to once again apply the Uber base shader to that object. So I had now an emissive plane that's going to be fairly bright, and it's over there. And then I duplicated it and moved it over to there. So then I had two of these guys exactly the same on opposite sides of the fox. And those are really going to be the primary source of light. And I've positioned them so that they're off camera, but they're going to throw a good bit of light onto the scene. And I like lights from the side like this. They create nice contours. They're comparatively soft because they're comparatively big. So you know, you don't get big strong shadows, but you do tend to see the shape of the object in nice relief. And so you saw in my previous tutorial I used a similar arrangement for a studio shot. Sometimes I use them for outside as well, especially in this kind of lighting condition. So definitely a good tool. So, and remember, that was just all I did was pick the object, and then use the Uber base shader, and then set the luminance, and I set the emission color to white, and that's that. I didn't change the temperature, so they'll have a little bit of a yellow cast at 6500. Sometimes I make that a little bit colder, but this nearly going to be nearly white. Great. So let me switch back to the camera view. So now we have this, and let's see what that looks like. We'll just go back and we're going to do an iRay preview of that, which will hopefully go a little bit faster. Oh, now I have the ground off. Forgot to turn the ground back on. But in any case, you can see there's quite a bit of nice contour being revealed there, and there's still, some shadows showing form. So I'm, kind of liking the soft lighting there. Might really, if I was doing this for reels, I might turn them down just a little bit. But I'm really liking kind of how the edges of these guys are looking, and that I've got a nice sort of soft glow on the side there. And I'm not too worried about what it looks like with this view, because I know that I'm going to be applying a great deal of fur to this guy, and I have not turned the fur on just yet. The moment I turn that fur on, the program is going to start going a lot more slowly because it's a whole lot of polygons associated with the fur. Okay, so I'm switching back to texture shaded again, and I'm going to turn back on my environment. Great. Now usually I also like to add some fill lighting. I guess I can enable the camera. So the way that I'll do that is to create a new spotlight and pick the option that makes the spotlight be the same as the view, so that will align it to the camera. Typically I actually take that spotlight and then parent it to the camera, as I've done here. See, the spotlight is parented to the camera. And I do that just because in case I slightly tweak the camera position, I don't want to have to then separately reposition the spotlight so that it remains a fill light. I really prefer to have the spotlight right aligned with that camera and staying aligned with the camera, so that there's no chance that the spotlight will cast any shadows. There's just no shadow that that spotlight could ever create would ever be visible, because it's of course lined up directly with the camera. If you move the fill light away from the camera very much, then really it stops being a fill light exactly, and it starts being some combination of fill and key, which is sort of maybe less desirable or harder to work with, and we don't really have a big penalty for having lights. Additionally, I did not have a very bright light. I wanted my fill to be fairly modest, so I have it set down at 500. So not too bright. It will light a little bit, and that's important. So that's nice. And I have one other slick trick that I like, and that is this. I like to have nice reflections in the eyeballs. And the way to create nice reflections in the eyeballs is, of course, to give them something to reflect. Now, you could do that by creating a 360 environment and having all kinds of stuff in front of there that might show up in the eyeballs. But a nice way to get good quality highlights in the eyes fairly cheaply is to add a sphere to the scene that's behind the camera and make that sphere be emissive. So if you look at the sphere that I've added here and we look at surfaces again, you'll see it has an emissive color that's, I've made it be, this magenta color. I probably wouldn't pick a magenta color for a real project, but I wanted it to stand out. And I've made it as bright as the neighboring planes that I was used for lighting. And again, you might make it a little bit more subtle than that. It's kind of up to you, but I really wanted it to show up for purposes of this tutorial. Now, the way I actually positioned it was, here, let me switch to perspective view so we get a better view of it. In fact, let me just kind of turn so I'm facing the camera. Okay, so here we are. So you can see the balls off to the side. I added the sphere to the scene, and then I parented the sphere to the camera. Now, this is really a great trick, because sometimes you add objects to the scene and you have no frickin' idea where they are, because the scene could be vast and the place where the objects get added could be very distant. So if you add the object to the scene and parent it to the camera, then you can go to the parameters tab and change the X translate, the Y translate, and the Z translate to be 0. And then the object will be right on the camera. Or if you like, you could do the same thing on, say, the fox, and then the object will be right on the fox. and you don't have to worry about where it was originally, and you don't have to worry about dragging it somewhere where you can see it. Just put that thing on the Fox and away you go. After that, I moved it around a little bit to get it in kind of a pleasing place. And the way that I did that was I switched back to the regular camera view. I put the ball right on the Fox's nose, and I made it fairly small, and then I lined it up so that I could see the highlights in the eyeballs, did a test render, and then I pulled it away and to the side whilst keeping it visible in the eyeballs. Because if you just put it somewhere at random, it can be kind of hard to find a spot that will be properly reflected. But if you stick it right, in front of the Fox, you'll get a feel for where it is. And as you move it, you can sort of incrementally move it out of the scene. And in the course of a few previews, you'll have a good sense of where it's going to land. So let me show you what it looks like with this much light now. So now we have a fill light, and we have the pink sphere, and it'll take a little bit longer to set up the render. And this time I remember to turn on the backgrounds. So let me just move this off here. Great. So I've moved that off. Okay, and so already you can see there's a little bit of a pink tint to our little Fox. Actually, it's magenta. And you can see a little bit of that pink already being reflected in the eye. And if I let the render go more, you'll see it even more pronounced. It's not too pronounced, and I think you'll also see that there's a little bit of reflection coming from the fill light, and that's great too. So now I have a little bit of action going on in the eyes, so they're not going to look quite so dead. And I've done that sort of very economically, which is pretty cool. So so the trick's there. Again, the Uber shader applied to the sphere, and then, setting my luminance and picking a suitable color. And remember that in candles per square meter, you need, a fairly big number here, like 500,000, to get a significant amount of light. If you you can also switch this to be kilocandles per square meter with that setting, and then you can use much smaller numbers. Usually I just leave it at default, and I'm kind of used to working in thousands. It is what it is. Here, let me switch out of the iRay mode. Back to texture shaded. Okay, so the important tricks are using the ball in front of the camera. Okay, as we can see, so it's not really in view. It's out of view, or sometimes I actually take the ball and literally move it back. Here, let me show you to like back here, so it's behind the camera. And you can even make it bigger. Sometimes making the ball bigger and just moving it further back just makes it that much easier to sort of find that ball in the view and get it in the eyeballs. Because I had a comparatively small ball that I had to aim. But if I make this guy more of a monster back there, then it's going to be a lot easier to make sure I'm keeping it in the eyeballs, and it's completely going to be not visible because it's behind the camera, and I've moved it far enough back that it's actually not going to cast any more light than it was earlier. So we could go back here and do another preview with the little thing further away. I didn't actually test this to see what it was going to look like, but I think that technique works. And even if it doesn't work in this particular picture, it's a great technique for you to use in other shots. I'll upload an example of a photo that's just got that technique going on to create nice reflections in the eyeballs. Just the essential thing is that you provide something to reflect. Yeah, I think it got, remember, it's candles per square meter, so if I make the object bigger, that's more square meters, so it's more light. And I sort of have to counteract that by moving the thing further back so that the light is attenuated. And so in this case, I made it quite a bit bigger, but I didn't move it far enough back that I got about equal light. But boy, I'm getting a much stronger highlight there. So, well, of course, you would expect a much stronger highlight with a much brighter light. Of course, if it didn't have a pink tint to it, then I could be using it to create that highlight and as part of my filling solution, for instance, and that could be quite a powerful technique as well. But I wanted to make sure you were seeing the ball light, so I picked a very strong color. All right, so let's stop this for a moment. we're going to just switch back to texture shaded so I don't have that preview. And actually I'm going to undo the scale and undo the translate so the ball's back where it was. That's important because I know what the scene's going to look like, and I rendered the final picture already, and I don't want to render the wrong picture for you. So you'll see what I had created before. So let's deal with the fur. As you can see, the fur has not been showing up in iRay. If we use the other renderer, then the other renderer does in fact understand guide hairs, and the whole look at my hair integration with that is perhaps a little bit easier to work with. In iRay, it's not so very hard. You have to bring up the look at my hair tab, which I have added right here so you can see it. Typically, I don't actually dock it like this because I just don't use it that often. But it's available off the window pane, and you just pull up the panes, and then it's under the L. So what you do is you select the group that you want to work with. That's this one, okay? And then you click the To OBJ button right here. Now what that's going to do is take all of the hairs the way they are right now and materialize them as sort of a regular polygon mesh. And there'll be lots of polygons. And you may notice that they're called sphere group 0 and sphere group 1, and that's just a bug. It turns out that instead of consistently applying the Arctic Fox prefix or whatever it is, it uses the prefix of whatever the last thing you had selected was. So in my case, I happened to have the sphere selected when I had just done this, and so it called them sphere group 1 and sphere group 0, but it really doesn't matter because these are just auto-generated items. Now importantly, while I was doing the guide hairs, as I reposed the fox, the guide hairs automatically moved and did their thing according to the hair rules. Once I generate the OBJs, then the OBJs do not track. They're like sort of a materialization of one particular moment in time. So I can't repose the fox again without regenerating, and it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to regenerate all the hairs for this fox at this quality level, and pretty much that's what you're going to want. So let me show you what that looks like. First I'm going to turn these off, okay? So the guide hairs are going away. You don't ever have to look at the guide hairs if you don't want, but I thought it would be kind of nice to look at them. I'm going to turn these two on. Okay, so you can see there's quite a lot of fur there, okay, quite a lot. And in fact, you may not be able to observe it easily, but like once I turn those on, everything, yeah, there you go. Okay, look at those. I'm just doing a simple selection. Everything gets more sluggish. Okay, just every little thing. So I'm going to select the fox. So, but just so you can get a sense of what this looks like, let me go and try to do an iRay render. Okay, and now we're going to do this again in the preview tab. This is going to take quite a bit longer. You can see everything is just much, much slower. I don't think you can see my cursor, but if you could see my cursor, you would see that I have the hourglass, or the spinning donut of death. Okay, my spinning donut of death is gone. So at this point, I'm doing the preview render, and I could also be, making other kinds of changes. So I'm just moving off of, trying to move off the screen so that there's as little interference as possible. You can see that it's rendering down here at the bottom. Well, you can't see where my cursor is, but I'm pointing to the progress bar at the bottom there. And we will soon get something like a real render, including the extra purple light and the reflections in the eyes and the fill light and the two side panels and a little bit of light from the background. Not too much emissivity in the background because I didn't want to overwhelm us with skylight. Most of the light should be coming from the side panels, a little bit of light from the purple, probably a little too much light in this case, but it's good technique. So you can use this to create views. You can see how much longer it's taking to get that first frame ready. And I won't let this finish because letting this finish to 100% convergence will take quite some time. And I don't really want to put you guys in a situation where you're going to be having to sit here and wait. But I do want you to get a sense of what it looks like. There we go. And once the first one comes in, we start getting some improvements. It's important to have the right render settings as well. You know, even in this preview, I have my GPU accelerated card, GPU accelerated configuration. Typically, I don't check the CPU option as well, and the reason is that I like the tool to remain somewhat responsive, and I get most of the value from my two GPUs. Um, and in case I want to look up something or browse something or whatever else. As it is, the machine gets fairly sluggish because the GPUs are going to be quite busy, and that impacts all kinds of drawing. If I were to also commit the CPU to this work, then the machine would be very, very sluggish indeed. So certainly this could probably use more tuning, maybe a little bit less light in the sides, maybe a little bit more in the sky. If I was going to finish this render, maybe I'd add some fog effect or some snow effect in the background to kind of help tie the scene together, and probably some wildlife and other kinds of things. But just trying to keep this very simple today, fairly straightforward pose, with the central ideas being good use of emissive objects, converting the look at my hair fur groups into actual polygons. Don't forget that you can parent objects and then set their XYZ translate to find them very easy. And don't forget to turn your headlamps off. Let me make sure that I actually did that here. Yes, my headlamp is in fact off. Many a time I forget to turn my headlamp off after I've been goofing around with the scene. So that's all I have for today. I'll post what this final version of the Fox looks like. I let it actually render for quite a bit longer previously, and so you'll be able to see kind of what it looks like. But really the final picture is not that exciting. I think what's much more interesting is the techniques I used, and you know, you could probably generate a much more interesting Fox pose than just one of the standard ones, and probably a much more interesting environment. So I hope that was somewhat educational and somewhat fun. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.